In a small, picturesque county where rolling hills meet sprawling fields, I found my peace as a farmer. My name is Sam, and I've dedicated my life to nurturing the land that has been in my family for generations. Each morning, I rise with the sun, tending to my crops and enjoying the simple joys of rural life. The smell of freshly tilled earth and the sound of chirping birds are constants in my daily routine, providing a sense of independence that fills me with pride. Living on my farm, I've always valued my freedom, both as a landowner and as a member of this tight-knit community. But everything changed when the local Homeowners Association, better known to many as the HOA, decided to get involved. You see, they fancy themselves the guardians of our neighborhood's aesthetics and regulations. While I respected their efforts to keep our community looking nice, I never imagined how far they would go to impose their rules. It all started when a particular member of the HOA, a woman we affectionately dubbed Karen, took it upon herself to monitor every aspect of our lives. She had a knack for popping up at the most inconvenient times, clipboard in hand, ready to issue warnings about everything from lawn heights to fence colors. Most folks in the neighborhood tried to keep their heads down and avoid her gaze, but I'm not one to back down easily. The tipping point came one fateful afternoon when I returned from the fields to find my driveway completely blocked. Karen had orchestrated a concrete pouring operation right at the entrance, preventing me from accessing my property. This was not just an inconvenience. It was an outright violation of my rights as a landowner. I stood there, staring at the stark gray slab that now separated me from my home, feeling a surge of frustration boiling within me. Little did Karen know that this act of defiance would lead to a confrontation that would change everything, not just for me, but for her and the entire county. With determination brewing in my heart, I prepared for what was to come. The first time I encountered the HOA, I was blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing. I had just finished planting a new crop of corn and was feeling accomplished when I noticed a commotion happening down the road. A group of residents was gathered, their expressions a mix of concern and annoyance. As I approached, I spotted Karen standing in front of them, her presence commanding attention like a self-appointed queen. Karen was notorious in our community. A middle-aged woman with a penchant for rules and an unwavering belief that she could dictate how others lived their lives. With her perfectly coiffed hair and a wardrobe that screamed authority, she wielded her clipboard like a sword, ready to battle anyone who dared to stray from her vision of perfection. It was clear to me that this was not just another neighborhood meeting. This was her stage. I listened as she scolded my neighbors about their slightly overgrown lawns and the wrong color of paint on a fence. Each word dripped with condescension, and I felt my blood begin to boil. I didn't have any issues with my own property, but it became evident that Karen had set her sights on me and my farm. Despite my efforts to maintain a peaceful existence, she saw my way of life as a threat to her pristine neighborhood ideals. Later that week, she approached me directly while I was mending a fence. "Sam," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I need to discuss your farming practices." Her expression made it clear this wasn't an invitation but an ultimatum. She began lecturing me about the supposed violations of HOA regulations, everything from noise levels during harvest season to the visibility of my livestock. I tried to reason with her, explaining that farming is not just my livelihood but also my passion. But Karen dismissed my words as if they were nothing more than the chirping of crickets in midsummer. It was then I realized this confrontation wouldn't be just about rules. It was about control. Her determination to enforce strict regulations against my farming activities would only escalate, setting the stage for the confrontation that lay ahead. The day I discovered my driveway had been blocked by concrete pouring is etched in my memory. I had just returned from the local market, a truckload of fresh produce ready for delivery. The sun was shining, and the air was filled with the earthy scent of summer. Everything felt right until I turned down my road. As I approached my property, confusion washed over me. There, right where my gravel driveway met the road, stood a thick slab of wet concrete, gleaming in the sunlight like a cruel joke. My heart sank as I pulled up closer, realizing this wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act orchestrated by Karen and her HOA crew. They had taken it upon themselves to block my access without any warning or consultation, citing aesthetic concerns about how my farm's activities impacted the neighborhood. Standing at the edge of the concrete mess, I felt a mix of disbelief and rage bubbling within me. How could they think this was acceptable? Not only did this action prevent me from accessing my farm, but it also jeopardized my daily operations. My livelihood depended on timely deliveries and regular maintenance of my crops and livestock. I couldn't afford delays. Every hour mattered when it came to harvesting and caring for my animals. Without access to my property, I felt powerless, as if they were trying to strip away not just my driveway but my very way of life. I stormed out of my truck and stomped toward the makeshift barricade, visions of Karen's smug face flashing through my mind. "What gives you the right?" I yelled into the air, frustration pouring out in waves. Of course, no one was around to hear me. Just a freshly poured slab that stood unyielding like a wall between me and everything I worked for. I envisioned all the tasks piling up. Crops that needed tending, animals waiting to be fed, customers expecting their orders. The implications were dire, and with each passing moment, my frustration deepened. This act wasn't just an inconvenience. It felt like an all-out assault on my freedom as a farmer and a member of this community. Little did they know, though, that their actions would stir something within me, an awakening that would set off a chain reaction none of us could foresee. After the shock of finding my driveway blocked by concrete wore off, a wave of determination washed over me. I wasn't going to let Karen and her HOA dictate how I lived my life or run my farm. Fueled by frustration, I decided it was time to confront her directly, hoping that reason might prevail over her rigid adherence to rules. I spent the next day preparing for our meeting, gathering evidence of my farming practices and the importance of my driveway. I jotted down notes about local agricultural regulations, the vital role my farm played in the community, and how the HOA's actions were not just inconvenient, they were downright harmful. With a deep breath, I headed to the next HOA meeting, ready to stand my ground. As I entered the community center, I was met with a mix of curious glances and raised eyebrows. The usual chatter quieted as I approached the front, where Karen sat with her fellow board members. Her expression shifted from surprise to smugness as she realized why I was there. It didn't take long for tensions to escalate. "Karen?" I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "Blocking my driveway is not just an inconvenience. It's an attack on my livelihood. You can't just decide what I can and cannot do with my property." The room buzzed with murmurs as I laid out my case. But instead of hearing me out, she interrupted with her usual condescension. "Sam, we're simply trying to maintain property values and community standards," she retorted sharply. "Your farming operations are disruptive and unsightly." I could feel my frustration boiling over at her dismissive tone. "Disruptive? My farm has been here for generations. It feeds this community. You're not maintaining anything. You're imposing your will without regard for those who live here." The conversation quickly devolved into a heated exchange, with Karen raising her voice and insisting that rules were rules. The room filled with tension as others began to take sides, some nodding in agreement with me, while others seemed swayed by Karen's determination to uphold her version of order. Despite feeling outnumbered, I refused to back down. My passion for my land and community was stronger than any bureaucracy they tried to enforce. As the meeting continued, it became clear that this confrontation was only the beginning of a much bigger battle. A battle that would soon reveal far more than just the conflict between a farmer and an HOA president. As the HOA meeting dragged on, I could feel the frustration and tension in the room building to a boiling point. Karen was relentless, her voice unwavering as she defended her actions against my farm. My heart raced, but amidst the chaos, a thought struck me, a realization that changed everything. Just days before the concrete incident, I had been reviewing old family records while preparing for an estate plan. My grandfather had been a shrewd landowner, and as I dug deeper, I discovered something incredible. Not only did I own my farm, but I also held the titles to significant portions of the surrounding land. In fact, I owned nearly every parcel in the county, from small residential lots to sprawling fields and forests. It was a legacy I had taken for granted until now. I could feel my pulse quicken as the revelation took hold. This information could flip everything on its head. Suddenly, Karen's attempts to dictate my life felt laughable. With newfound confidence, I decided it was time to share what I had uncovered. "Karen," I interjected as she was about to dismiss me again. "I think it's time for you and everyone here to understand something important." The room quieted, curiosity piqued by my sudden shift in tone. "I don't just own this farm," I continued, my voice steady. "I own nearly all the land in this county, including much of what you consider your precious neighborhood." Gasps echoed through the crowd as people turned to one another in disbelief. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. Karen's smug expression vanished, replaced by a look of genuine concern. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she processed this information. "You can't be serious," she stammered, her confidence faltering for the first time. "That's impossible." But it was true. My family's legacy was vast and significant. With that revelation came power that made Karen's rules seem small and irrelevant. The stakes were higher than ever now. This wasn't just about a block driveway anymore. It was about standing up against tyranny and reclaiming my rights as a landowner in my own county. The ground beneath us had shifted irrevocably, and I was ready to fight back with everything I had. With the revelation of my ownership over significant portions of the county hanging in the air, I felt a surge of empowerment. No longer was I just a farmer fighting against a rogue HOA. I was now the landowner with deep roots in this community. My rights were not only intact but also fortified by the very land that had belonged to my family for generations. The implications of this ownership were profound, both legally and personally. Legally, I had the upper hand. The county records were clear. I had been granted rights to not just my farm but also to the surrounding properties, including those that made up this contentious neighborhood. This meant that Karen and her HOA had overstepped their boundaries in a big way. They may have thought they could dictate how I managed my land, but I now knew I had the authority to challenge their every move. The concrete blockade was not just an inconvenience. It was a direct violation of my property rights. I began to envision my next steps. With a solid legal foundation supporting me, I could easily engage attorneys well-versed in property law to challenge the HOA's actions. As I pondered my strategy, a wave of excitement replaced the frustration that had previously consumed me. The idea of taking on Karen and her cadre of rule enforcers was no longer daunting. It was invigorating. But it wasn't just about legal retaliation. There were personal implications to consider as well. In standing up for myself, I would be setting an example for other residents who felt oppressed by the HOA's overreach. Many neighbors had voiced their frustrations about Karen's heavy-handed tactics in private conversations but had hesitated to act out of fear or uncertainty. Now, emboldened by my ownership and impending fight, I could create a ripple effect throughout the community. I envisioned organizing meetings with fellow residents, sharing information about their own rights as property owners, and rallying support against unreasonable restrictions. This could become a movement, an opportunity for many to reclaim their voices and challenge an authority that had grown too comfortable in its control. Feeling invigorated by these possibilities, I realized that this wasn't simply about protecting my farm anymore. It was about championing the rights of all landowners in our county and dismantling the oppressive rule enforced by Karen and her HOA once and for all. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to lead the charge. Emboldened by my newfound understanding of ownership and rights, I set out to rally support from my neighbors. The moment I walked away from the HOA meeting, I knew I wasn't alone in my frustrations. Many residents had quietly borne the brunt of Karen's oppressive tactics, and it was time to bring those grievances to light. I started by reaching out to a few neighbors I knew had faced similar issues. There was Tom, who had been fined for his fence being too tall, and Sarah, who had received complaints about her vegetable garden's appearance. Over coffee at the local diner, I shared my revelation about owning much of the land in the county. Their eyes widened in disbelief, followed by expressions of hope. It became clear that they were eager for change but had felt powerless against the HOA's iron grip. "Sam," Tom said with a hint of excitement, "if you're serious about this, we'd like to stand with you." That simple statement ignited something within me. With each conversation I had, more residents joined our cause, sharing their stories of frustration and fear surrounding Karen's relentless enforcement of her rules. The community's discontent began to bubble to the surface, and it felt invigorating. I gathered everyone at my farm one warm evening, under the golden glow of sunset. As we sat around a large wooden table, I laid out my plan for fighting back against the HOA. "We all deserve to live comfortably on our own properties," I said passionately. "It's time we come together to reclaim our rights and challenge their control." The atmosphere was electric as people began to share their ideas and grievances openly. We discussed drafting a petition outlining our collective concerns and potential legal actions we could take against the HOA's overreach. Neighbors who had once felt isolated suddenly found solidarity in one another. Laughter mixed with determination filled the air as we brainstormed strategies. By the end of that gathering, we had formed a coalition, a united front against Karen and her HOA. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing together as a community to reclaim our rights and protect our way of life. As I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, we would challenge the status quo and ensure that our voices would no longer be silenced by one overbearing individual. The tide was turning, and I was ready to lead this charge alongside my newfound allies. With the support of my neighbors solidifying, it was time to explore the legal avenues available to us. The thought of taking on the HOA in a legal battle was daunting, but I felt empowered knowing I had both the community and my rights behind me. The first step was to consult with a lawyer who specialized in property law. I reached out to a local attorney, Ms. Ramirez, who came highly recommended for her expertise in cases involving HOAs and property disputes. The day she arrived at my farm, I could feel a mix of anticipation and nervousness. As we sat at my kitchen table surrounded by farm photographs and family heirlooms, I explained the situation, how Karen had blocked my driveway and how her actions were affecting not just me but also many of my neighbors. Ms. Ramirez listened intently, taking notes as I recounted the series of events leading to this point. When I finally shared the revelation about my extensive land ownership, her eyes sparkled with interest. "This changes everything," she said with an encouraging nod. "You have substantial rights here that can be defended." Together, we began reviewing local property laws and regulations governing HOAs. Ms. Ramirez outlined several key points that would be crucial in our fight. First, she emphasized that HOAs must act within their authority and adhere to the rules set forth in their governing documents. Karen's unilateral decision to block my driveway was a clear violation of those principles. Next, we discussed drafting a formal complaint against the HOA. This document would outline not only the violations committed by Karen but also our collective grievances as residents. Ms. Ramirez suggested including testimonies from my neighbors, evidence that their authority was being misused and that we were willing to stand together in this fight. Finally, she advised us on potential legal remedies, including seeking an injunction to remove the concrete blockade and pursuing damages for any losses incurred due to their actions. The prospect of going toe-to-toe with Karen in court was intimidating, but armed with knowledge and support, I felt ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. As we concluded our meeting, Ms. Ramirez encouraged me to gather all relevant documents related to my property ownership and the HOA's governing rules. With determination surging through me, I knew this wasn't just about reclaiming my driveway. It was about standing up for my rights as a landowner and ensuring that no one else in our community had to endure what we had faced at the hands of an overreaching HOA. The legal battle was brewing, and I was prepared to fight for justice. The day of the public HOA meeting arrived with a palpable tension in the air. My heart raced as I prepared my notes, outlining not just my grievances but also the collective voice of my neighbors who had rallied behind me. This was our moment, a showdown against Karen and her board, and I was determined to make it count. As I walked into the community center, I could see familiar faces among the crowd, friends and neighbors who had come to support me. Their solidarity bolstered my confidence, reminding me that I was not alone in this fight. The room buzzed with anticipation as residents whispered among themselves, some exchanging knowing glances that suggested they were ready for a change. Karen sat at the front, flanked by her fellow board members, her expression one of defiance. She had a way of commanding attention, but today I was prepared to turn the tables. When it was finally my turn to speak, I felt a rush of adrenaline as I approached the podium. The silence in the room felt heavy, charged with expectation. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady despite the nerves coursing through me. "I'm here today not just for myself but for every resident who has felt stifled by our HOA's overreach." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience as I continued. I detailed the series of events leading up to this meeting, the blocked driveway, the fines imposed for trivial offenses, and how Karen had attempted to dictate our lives without regard for our rights as property owners. With each point I made, I saw heads nodding in agreement. The unity we had built was palpable. Then came the reveal. "What you might not know," I said, pausing for effect as I scanned the room, "is that I own not just my farm but significant portions of this county, much of what this HOA governs." Gasps filled the space as Karen's face paled. "I have every right to oppose these actions," I continued, my voice rising with conviction. "We are not just subjects under your rule. We are landowners with rights that deserve respect." As I laid out our plans for legal action and community unity, energy surged through the room. My neighbors cheered in support while Karen sat stunned, clearly unprepared for this revelation. It felt like a pivotal moment, a turning point where we shifted from being passive residents to empowered landowners, ready to reclaim our community. The confrontation escalated from there, but I knew we were on the right path. This wasn't just about one block driveway anymore. It was about standing up for our rights, and together we would no longer be silenced. The showdown had begun, and with every word spoken, we were reclaiming our power. The aftermath of the meeting was electric. As I stepped down from the podium, the applause from my neighbors echoed in my ears like a triumphant anthem. The energy in the room had shifted dramatically. We had transformed from a group of intimidated residents into a formidable coalition, ready to stand our ground against the HOA. In the days following the confrontation, the consequences of our newfound unity became clear. Karen's demeanor changed noticeably. No longer was she the self-assured enforcer of rules. Now, she appeared cautious and defensive. It became evident that her authority had been challenged, and she was struggling to regain her footing. Rumors spread quickly through the community about my ownership of significant portions of land, and with it came increased support from previously silent neighbors who had suffered under her rule. As for me, I knew we had to act quickly to capitalize on this momentum. With legal counsel backing us, we filed a formal complaint against the HOA, challenging their actions and demanding accountability for their overreach. The petition included signatures from dozens of residents who were fed up with Karen's heavy-handed approach. It was a powerful symbol of our collective resolve. In response to our actions, the HOA called an emergency meeting. The atmosphere was tense as Karen and her board members faced an increasingly vocal group of residents who no longer feared retribution. Many voiced their experiences of intimidation and unreasonable fines, echoing sentiments that had long been kept quiet. The turning point came when Karen ultimately acknowledged that some changes were necessary. Faced with mounting pressure and potential legal repercussions, she proposed reforms to the HOA's regulations, changes that would limit their ability to impose arbitrary fines and increase transparency in their decision-making processes. The community began to feel like a different place. Neighbors who once avoided confrontation now engaged in lively discussions about property rights and community standards. We formed a committee dedicated to ensuring that future HOA actions adhered to fair practices, giving everyone a voice in how our neighborhood would be managed. As for me, I felt a profound sense of relief and accomplishment, knowing that I had not only reclaimed my driveway, but also sparked a movement for positive change within our community. We had turned the tide against an oppressive regime. Together we were stronger than any one individual's authority. The battle might have started with one block driveway, but it blossomed into a fight for justice that would forever reshape our lives in this county. As I stood on my porch, watching the sun set over the fields I had fought so hard to protect, I couldn't help but reflect on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded. What began as a simple act of defiance from an HOA Karen had transformed into a profound lesson about property rights, community, and the importance of standing up against unreasonable authority. The experience had opened my eyes to the power of ownership. I had always cherished my land, but now I understood that owning property came with responsibilities and rights that should never be taken lightly. It wasn't just about maintaining a farm. It was about safeguarding my freedom and the freedoms of those around me. When we allow others to dictate how we live our lives, we risk losing not only our autonomy but also the very essence of what makes a community thrive. Moreover, this journey taught me the value of solidarity. I had seen firsthand how fear can silence even the most passionate individuals. But when we banded together, our collective voice became unstoppable. My neighbors and I learned that by sharing our stories and supporting one another, we could challenge even the most entrenched power structures. The sense of camaraderie that grew from our shared struggle was inspiring. It reminded me that we are stronger together. I also gained a deeper appreciation for civic engagement. As we navigated legal processes and engaged with local governance, I realized how important it is to participate actively in our communities. Understanding property laws and advocating for fair practices not only empowers individuals, but also cultivates a sense of responsibility toward one another. Looking back, I felt gratitude for the challenges we faced. They forced me to grow, to educate myself, and ultimately to fight for something greater than myself. Our victory was not just about reclaiming my driveway. It was about setting a precedent that would resonate throughout the county for years to come. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle overhead, I knew this was only the beginning. The lessons learned would guide me in future endeavors, reminding me always to stand firm in my beliefs and to champion justice for all who feel oppressed. Our community had awakened, and together we would continue to foster an environment where everyone's rights were respected. A legacy worth fighting for. As I sat on my porch, sipping a glass of sweet tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon, I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Who would have thought that a simple farmer like me could find themselves in an epic showdown with an HOA president over a blocked driveway? The whole situation felt almost comical in hindsight, a classic David and Goliath tale with a twist that not even I could have predicted. I remembered the first time Karen had confronted me about my farming practices. The way she'd waved her clipboard around, as if it were a magic wand that could dictate every aspect of our lives. It struck me as funny now that she thought a slab of concrete could keep me from my land. Little did she know that my roots ran deeper than those foundations she poured. It was as if she had unwittingly challenged a bear in its own den. The humor didn't stop there. The reactions from my neighbors during the showdown were priceless. Some gasped in disbelief when I revealed my ownership of nearly the entire county, while others stifled laughter as they recalled their own run-ins with Karen's quirky rules. We became a tight-knit group sharing inside jokes about Karen's rule book, which seemed to change with every whim she had. In many ways, this experience brought not only laughter, but also a renewed appreciation for my land. It reminded me why I fell in love with farming in the first place. The peace of the fields, the satisfaction of growing crops, and the joy of sharing fresh produce with others. My determination to protect my little slice of paradise was fueled by love, not just for the land itself but for the community it nurtured. As I looked out over my fields, now free from concrete barriers and oppressive rules, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride wash over me. I was grateful for the journey that had unfolded, every moment, every challenge, and every laugh shared along the way. So here's to the quirks of life that lead us on unexpected adventures. I may still be just a farmer, but now I'm also an advocate for my rights and those of my neighbors. And if you ever need someone to stand up against an HOA or share a laugh over the absurdities of life, well, you know where to find me, right here on my farm, ready to protect what matters most with a smile on my face and a twinkle in my eye.